Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to my channel. This is the Hungry Math Professor here, and today we are going to be discussing The Vegetarian by Han Kang. And I really enjoyed this book. I'm so glad it came to my attention. And it came to my attention perhaps in a similar way that it may have came to your attention, which is because Han recently won the Nobel Prize for Literature. But now I know that this book was originally published in 2007 in South Korea, and then it was translated into English in 2015 by Deborah Smith, and then recently afterwards in 2016 won the Man Booker Prize, International Prize for Literature. So it's a well-received book already. But now that Han has won the Nobel Prize in Literature, I assume, just like myself, that there'll be a whole nother batch of readers. And I think that's great because this is a very good book and it deserves to be read by a much wider audience. And probably one of my favorite parts about how the book is written is that it's written in three different parts. It's fairly nonlinear and open-ended. And but what's interesting is it centers around this one female character, Young Hee, but you never really get the story from her directly from her point of view. Instead, in the first part, the story is told in the first person from her husband, Mr. Chang's point of view. In the second part, it's told in the third person from her brother-in-law's point of view. And in the third part of the book, it's told in the third person from her sister's point of view. And what's interesting, maybe in the first part of the book, where we're hearing the story told by Mr. Chang, Young Hee's husband, and you start to learn about their relationship. And what's striking about it in the very beginning is just how um, uninteresting it is, to be quite honest. I mean, Young Chi or Mr. Chong describes his wife as completely unremarkable in any way. And it seems like he decided on his partner because she was easy. He saw her as somehow easy to get along with. She wouldn't give him much of a hard time or make him do things he didn't want to do. And it seemed like a very simple decision with not much thought besides that. Um, as the first part of the book goes on, though, we start to learn that Young Hee has some kind of bad dreams. It's not entirely clear what these dreams are made of, but they clearly are disturbing Young Hee. And one night, she wakes up in the middle of the night after having one of these dreams and decides to become a vegetarian. Later on in the book, she mentions that she thought that if she stopped eating meat, these bad dreams would go away. And so she, goes to the refrigerator and the freezer and throws out all the meat in the house. Um, she begins to lose a lot of weight. And I just want to say that it becomes clear that this is really not about vegetarianism much. Um, of course, you can be a vegetarian without losing any weight. Later on in the book, we find out that she is diagnosed with anorexia. And so it seems like in the beginning of the book, she thinks becoming a vegetarian will somehow alleviate these bad dreams that she's having. But um, it doesn't seem, it's not just becoming a vegetarian. She's also just not eating properly in general and struggling with mental illness throughout the entire book. But the fact that she became a vegetarian is eventually becomes a really frustrating detail for her husband. And so her husband contacts the rest of her family. Presumably, he knows that this is not going to fly with them. And they set up this intervention at her sister's house where her whole family comes over. So it's her father, her brother, which we learn very little about in the entire story, her brother-in-law, her sister, her nephew, and her husband at the house. And there's lots of food that's been made by her sister and lots of meat, presumably. And they are insisting that Young Hee eats some meat. They're worried about her health. Um, but it also seems like they're worried about just being um, this being seen by other people as weird, and they're worried about maybe just the pressure socially from other people that they know, and as well as just being worried about their daughter. And but anyway, her father gets really aggressive and is trying to force her by just pure bravado at some point, but then it becomes more than that, and her father and her brother are physically restraining her, and her father is trying to force pork down her mouth. And it's this really disturbing scene where I think we're struck by how little the family seems to treat young he as a person. Like, they don't seem to be concerned with understanding who young he is and what's she going through. Why is she becoming a vegetarian? Um, they also just don't seem at this point in her life to have much understanding of who Young He is. Presumably, Young He has struggled with mental illness maybe for most of her life, or at least at some point in her teens, perhaps presented with some issues that her family would have noticed. But it doesn't seem like anyone in her family has really taken much time to reflect on who young he is or what she might be going through. And in this scene, it doesn't really matter to the father or the rest of the family, but it doesn't really seem to matter what young he wants. Um, the father believes that she should eat meat, and he also seems to believe that if he says so, then that should be enough of an order, like a military order or something that she should follow. In any case, as the father and the brother are forcing this meat down her throat, she slips away and grabs a fruit knife and slits her wrist and is bleeding very badly. And so she is sent to the hospital, but also eventually winds up in a psych ward. And towards the end of the first part of the book, she sneaks away from her room somehow and is found in the hallway naked, sunning herself. And as her husband finds her, there's this compelling scene where Young He looks to her husband and says, "Have I done something wrong?" And it's sort of like, you might imagine a child asking their parent, like, "Have I done something wrong?" Hoping that they haven't, but also like not sure what right and wrong is, or still learning what's going on there. And I should just say, in the first part of the book, um, you learn a lot that Young He doesn't like to wear a bra, and this seems to bother her husband. But also, as the book progresses, there's many scenes where Young He is found naked, sunning herself. Um, and it's not clear in the first or second part of the book why she's doing this. But what's interesting, in the third part of the book, we find out that Young Hee um, eventually she wants to become a plant, and in particular, she wants to become a tree. So somehow, this sunning herself is, maybe she thinks that she can photosynthesize the sun and turn it into nutrients, and perhaps this is part of why she doesn't eat much anymore, because she thinks that she can sustain herself by just like sun and water or something. But that takes us to the second part of the book. And in the second part of the book, it's told from the point of view of the brother-in-law, and young he and her husband have broken up, and so we never hear from her husband again in the book. And from the very beginning, we're struck by how the brother-in-law is sexualizing young he. She has this Mongolian mark on her back, which I didn't know what that was, so you can look that up. But it's a certain type of blue birthmark. Most of the time, the birthmark goes away as someone ages. But in the case of Young He, this has not gone away, apparently. And for whatever reason, the brother-in-law finds this like very sexually attractive, but also in general, he's just attracted to her. Again, at various points in this part of the book, Young He is found sunning herself naked, and the brother-in-law is very um, sexually attracted to these moments, and he gets this idea. So the brother-in-law is an artist, and he gets this idea to paint flowers all over Young Hee and to just record her naked. And so they do this, and it doesn't seem to be. I mean, clearly they're crossing some lines and going down maybe a poor direction, but so far it doesn't hasn't gotten too out of control. But now he has this idea that he should invite somebody else to also be painted, and they should have sex together. That somehow this would be a you'd be pushing more boundaries artistically in the scene by doing this. And so anyway, he eventually gets this to happen, but his friend that he chooses to be in the scene and have sex with, his sister-in-law, is very disturbed by the scene and cannot fully take part. And eventually he just leaves and does not want to actually have sex with Young Hee and really be a part of this scene anymore. And what's interesting though is Young Hee is seems to be very sexually aroused by this event, but towards the end we find out that she's somehow aroused by just the fact that the man is painted with flowers. So again, there's this sense that Young Hee is sort of identifies with plants or wants to be a tree or just enjoys the flowers and things of nature in some sense. And it's not entirely clear exactly what's going on there, but she somehow is admits to being sexually aroused by the flowers themselves and not by the traditional expectation of you might expect. And so the brother-in-law wants to get involved in the scene and asks her if he can, and she says no. But then it becomes clear that as long as he was to paint himself with flowers, then she would be okay with this. And so um I'll skip some of these details now, but this part of the book ends in very tragically and disturbingly, because the brother-in-law does get painted with flowers and winds up going over the sister Young Hee's apartment, and he wants to have sex with her, and eventually does. But it's clear that this is a rape scene, and he gets it on tape, and it's quite disturbing. And then at the very end of the second part, his wife discovers them and has called the authorities. And that's how the second part of the book ends. Um, and then the third part begins, and now we see that the brother-in-law and the sister have separated after this event, and now Young Hee is in a mental institution. And the third part of the book again is told in the third person point of view from her sister's perspective, and we're immediately just struck by how overwhelmed her sister is, but also how good of a job she's doing considering. I mean, she's keeping this business going. She is looking after her son, Jiwoo, um, and she finds herself quite lonely after this terrible relationship has ended, but also ended in this very disturbing way. And now she's the only one who has kept Hung in her life, and so she is the only one that visits Young Hee in the hospital, or visits her or keeps track of her at all. So she has a lot on her plate, and we're struck by just how overwhelmed and lonely she is. And but this third part of the book is mostly about Young Hee's going to visit, or sorry, her sister going to visit Young Hee in this mental institution. And this is also where we find out that Young Hee has escaped once before from this mental institution and gone into the woods while it was raining and basically pretended to be a tree in the woods. And I think, it's presumed that she wanted to stay out as a tree as long as she could, but eventually was discovered. And now she's in this mental institution and she hasn't been eating. And so she's basically wasting away. And her sister gets and talks to the doctors and tries to convince them to give her just one more chance to convince her sister to eat. And so she meets with her sister and is trying to get her to eat. But it's clear that her sister doesn't want to eat. She doesn't talk very much, but she's like posing as a tree in her room. And um, something interesting that comes up in this last part of the book at one point is Young Hee asks, like, is it so bad to die? And it seems to be implied here that her life is so disturbing to her, and she doesn't want to eat. She doesn't want to do these things. Maybe she wants to be a tree. Maybe if she was able to become a tree, she wouldn't be very satisfied by it anyway. And so there's this question of like, why is it so bad to die, right? And the rest of you are enjoying your life, so you want to keep living, but I'm not enjoying my life. And so why can't I just die? Why do you keep trying to keep me alive? Why do I need to keep trying to make something of this? I didn't even ask to be here, right? There's these existential questions that come up about what is the purpose of life anyway? And if I'm not enjoying my life, then why should I stick around? I don't want to say that I support or am against this per se, but these are the kinds of questions that we have to ask as human beings. Like, what is it that we're here for, and is it so bad to die, right? But her sister is not satisfied with this. I mean, you can tell her sister really cares about Young Hee and wants to see her eat again and wants to see her live and is trying to help her in any way she can. Towards the end of the book, there's this disturbing scene where the doctors are trying to force feed Young Hee, but they have to do it in a very disturbing way by sticking a feeding tube down her throat and forcing, maybe liquids into her stomach or something. And but as the procedure's going on and Young Hee is not cooperating, and at some point her sister intervenes, and it seems that Young Hee gets injured in this process, and so they have to rush her to the hospital. And so the last couple pages of the book, we just see Young Hee and her sister in a ambulance, presumably being rushed to the hospital. And what's interesting here is you see her sister at one point saying, perhaps this is all a big dream. Maybe this is not actually real, like this entire thing, right? I mean, they're both experiencing some really disturbing, just a series of disturbing things to both of them. And there's this reflection of maybe this isn't even real anyway, and we're just going to wake up at some point. But then there's also this revelation at the end by her sister that she says to Young Hee that, I also have dreams too. And, I'm also have some disturbing dreams. And it almost seems at some point that she's saying that, like, I have these disturbing dreams, but I just don't let them get too much power over me, or I try to push them away. But it's not clear exactly what to make of this confession. Is she saying that she also struggles with mental illness, or is she just saying that she doesn't always enjoy her life and she struggles with depression or anxiety or something like this? Um, it's not entirely clear. Or, is she just saying that although she's strong and lives her life in this sort of traditional, conventional way and takes care of this business and her son and things, that she's not really enjoying her life that much and would rather, wake up. Um, it's not clear, but in general, this is how the book ends. It's very open ended, but I think it leaves us with questions about, what is the meaning of life, and um, how much are we really enjoying this life? Are we just looking around and seeing people enjoying it, but maybe they're not enjoying things as much as we think they are? And it's also this like reflection on the fact that we're all kind of struggling with various different things at different points in our lives, and some more than others. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't have a great way of telling you exactly what this book is about, but I will say it's very powerful. I like that it ends open ended, and but again, it's hard to say exactly what it means. In any case, I would encourage you to read it. Let me know what you think. If there's anything I said that you want to comment on, feel free to comment on the video, like and subscribe. And I hope to see you at one of my other book discussions. Thanks.